This happened to me roughly 2 years back, while I was making the long drive from New York down to Tennessee to visit an old college buddy. I made that trip solo, which honestly, I prefer. There's something I've always liked about long drives. Alone. You throw on a podcast, let the miles roll by, and stop whenever you feel like it. No schedule, no compromises. I'd left before sunrise, thinking I could push straight without stopping overnight. By the time midnight rolled around, though, that plan had completely fallen apart. I was somewhere in Virginia, off a highway I couldn't name if I tried. And I was the kind of tired where keeping your eyes on the road felt like an active struggle. I pulled off at one of those exits, where the only options are a gas station, a fast food place, and a couple of aging motels. I picked the cheapest one. All I needed was a few hours of sleep. I wasn't looking for luxury. The place lived up to its price point. 2 stories, every room facing the parking lot. Half the exterior lights flickering or dead. Barely any cars out front. I almost turned back around and kept driving. But exhaustion won, I figured. It's just a bed for a few hours. How bad could it be? The front desk was behind thick plexiglass. The guy working the night shift looked to be in his 50s and barely acknowledged me when I walked in. I paid for the room, grabbed my key card, and asked him if the place was pretty empty that night. He said most of the upstairs rooms were vacant. I remember that making me feel better. I figured at least there wouldn't be people making noise. All night, oh. The irony, my room was on the 2nd floor, near the far end of the building. Old, a little musty and human, in that way that hits you the moment you step inside. The AC unit made a grinding, rattling sound the second I turned it on. So I left it off. I seriously considered just sleeping in my car. But I was already there, already paid, and too tired to care, I locked the door. Drew the blinds, showered, and climbed into bed with the TV on low. About 20 minutes in, I started hearing arguing through the wall. A couple fighting, I figured just what I needed. The walls were paper thin. Thin enough that I could hear 2 distinct voices, but not make out exactly what was being said. One voice was low and aggressive. The other was softer, higher pitched. But something about that second voice nagged at me. It didn't sound right. Like a man doing a deliberate impression of a woman, rather than an actual woman speaking. The back and forth kept going. And the longer I listened, the more something felt off about it. Real arguments have overlap, people cutting each other off, talking over each other. But this had none of that. Each voice waited perfectly for the other to finish, like someone reading lines from a script they'd memorized. I turned my TV all the way down and just listened. That's when it clicked. It was one person doing both voices. Once I heard it that way, I couldn't unhear it. The natural voice. And then the same man shifting into something different. An imitation, a performance. The pit in my stomach that formed in that moment was unlike anything I'd felt in a long time, because this wasn't a noisy neighbor argument. This was something else entirely. The voices continued for another few minutes, then went completely silent. I lay there staring at the ceiling, hoping whatever that was had run its course. Then came 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the wall right beside my bed. A muffled voice came through. "I can hear you in there." I held my breath. Then the knocking came again. Same rhythm, same words, like he was waiting for a response. I grabbed the remote and turned the TV up, trying to drown it out for about 30 seconds, nothing. Then I heard the vibration of a door opening down the balcony. He had left his room. The footsteps on the balcony were getting closer. My blinds were almost fully shut, except no explanation. No motive. Nothing. They charged him with armed breaking and entering, but investigators never figured out why he specifically chose my house. The officers even admitted they believed robbery wasn't his real intention. That thought haunted me for years. Because if he only wanted money, why sit upstairs quietly in my bedroom with weapons laid out beside him? Instead of running the second he heard police outside. The more I replayed that night in my head, the more disturbing it became. What if I had answered the phone earlier? What if I had opened the door thinking he needed help from the storm? What if I had tried running upstairs instead of hiding? I honestly believe I survived because I trusted my instincts. Even now, over 20 years later, I still remember the exact sound of those slow footsteps moving through the hallway while thunder shook the windows. Sometimes during heavy rainstorms, those memories come rushing back stronger than ever. What makes it worse is never knowing the truth. Maybe I was randomly targeted. Maybe he had been watching me for days. Or maybe those mysterious phone calls were never random at all. To this day, I still wonder if the person calling my house that night was actually the man standing outside my door, waiting to see if anyone was home. And honestly, that question is far scarier than knowing the answer. A few years later, another stormy night brought a completely different kind of terror. My mom had left town for one of her regular work trips, leaving me alone at the house for the weekend. At first, I didn't mind it. I spent the day playing video games, watching YouTube, and enjoying the sound of rain pouring outside. By afternoon, the storm had grown heavier. Dark clouds covered the sky so much that the house looked like nighttime, even though it was only around 2 p.m. I ended up falling asleep on the couch downstairs. That's when I heard it whistling. Soft, slow, almost cheerful at first. He knocked on the door next to mine. No answer. He stood there a full minute, knocking and asking the guy to come out. Nothing. Eventually, he came to me. I opened the door and explained everything. When I finished, he paused for a moment before telling me the man had been staying there for a while. That was all I needed to hear. I asked to switch rooms. He said yes without hesitation and moved me downstairs near the front office, close to the parking lot and my car. The new room was nearly identical, but it felt like a different world. No one next door management nearby. I locked myself in, turned the TV on low, and after a long while, exhaustion finally pulled me under. I don't know how much time passed. Before I woke up again, it was still dark. What pulled me out of sleep was a sound, movement outside the window. I looked toward the blinds and watched a shadow pass slowly across the gap. Then it passed again. I crept to the window, moved the blinds just a fraction, and looked out. It was him. The same man from upstairs. He was walking past my new room, back and forth over and over, but this time he wasn't making any sounds. No voices, no knocking. He was just walking the length of the building, glancing toward my window every single time. The silence made it worse. The chaos before had been terrifying, but this was something colder, calm, deliberate, patient. I watched him do it 4 or 5 times before he disappeared around the back of the motel. I didn't sleep again. The second the sky started getting light, I packed everything up, threw it in my car, and drove off without returning the key card. I stopped at a gas station down the road for coffee. My hands were still shaking when I held the cup. That was just story 1. Story 2 involves a group of women on a road trip. A motel lobby, a man who heard too much, and a moment outside a door that turned everything from unsettling to genuinely terrifying. Stay with me. This one happened in 2022, when I was a freshman at college in Central Texas. Spring break arrived, and my family drove out to pick me up from my dorm so we could take a road trip together. It was an all-girls trip. 3 of my sisters, my stepmom, and my grandma. We drove up through Oklahoma to explore some Native American history my stepmom has a personal connection to, then swung over to Branson before the break ended, and we needed to head back. The drive back was long, and by 8 in the evening, we were all drained. We stopped at a random motel off the highway to get some sleep before finishing the drive in the morning. And before settling into the rooms, decided to go grab some pizza nearby. Before we left, we swung by the rooms to drop our bags off. My grandma called to ask for the room number so she could change clothes, and my sister answered out loud right there in the lobby. That's when I noticed him. A man standing near the entrance of the building. Not doing anything, just standing there. I've always been the type to stay aware of my surroundings, maybe more than most people. Something about this made every alarm in my head go off quietly, but instantly. Just standing. Watching I mentioned it to my sister. She brushed it off, but I'd already realized the problem. Our room number had just been said out loud. In a motel with thin walls and an open lobby. Well within earshot of a man I didn't trust. We had to walk right past him to get to the exit. When we did, he looked at me. That look stayed with me the entire time we were out. We came back around 10 or 11 that night, tired and just ready for sleep. As we walked through the lobby, I saw him again this time. He was sitting in the far back corner of the lobby, in a section where the lights weren't even on. Just sitting in the dark, doing nothing, phone in his hand, whispering into it. I walked faster. My grandma called again for the room number. My sister said it out loud again. I didn't sleep with ease that night, knowing he'd now heard it twice. We were barely settled in when the knock came at the door, and what my stepmom told us next, about what she found waiting just outside her door in the dark hallway, made us all start packing immediately. Part 4 is the conclusion you won't want to miss. We got upstairs and split into our rooms. My 2 sisters and I were in one room. My other sister's stepmom and grandma were a couple doors down. For a few minutes, everything seemed fine. We were just on our phones, winding down, almost ready to sleep. Then came a knock at the door. I'd already been talking to my sisters about how uneasy I felt, so my heart dropped the moment I heard it. But it was our stepmom. The second we opened the door, she stepped inside quickly, and just the look on her face told me something had happened before. She said a single word. She told us to start packing right now. While we threw things into bags, she explained what happened. She had cracked her door open to toss some trash into the hallway and found a man standing silently directly beside her door. He wasn't startled when the door opened. He didn't flinch or step back. He just turned and stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked calmly into the empty room. Between the 2 rooms our group was occupying. That was enough. We were leaving. My stepmom went to the front desk and surprisingly got a full refund after explaining the situation. The rest of us moved toward the exit, and as we walked out into the parking lot, we saw him again, the man in black. From the lobby was stepping out of the elevator, heading back down to the ground floor, tracking us as we moved. Then we noticed someone else. Another man near the far end of the parking lot. Hands cupped against car windows, peering inside jiggling door handles, testing each one. When he heard us getting to the car, he looked up, then he glanced back toward the motel entrance and tilted his head, signaling. We had already started piling into the car. Didn't become something worse. A third man came walking out of the motel entrance. Now there were 3 of them, spread across the parking lot, all slowly moving in the direction of our car. My stepmom was on the phone with my dad, trying to explain the situation. Everyone in the car was begging her to drive. She finally did. We peeled out of that parking lot and kept driving until almost 3 in the morning before finding another place to stop. That motel had cockroaches. I had never been so genuinely relieved to see cockroaches in my life. I still don't know what those men were planning or how coordinated it really was. But the way the first man had spent that entire positioning himself listening for our room number twice and then showing up outside our door in the dark, it wasn't random. Whatever it was, we got out before it could reach its conclusion. He spoke quietly, which was unusual for him, and told me to come back outside. When I stepped around to where he'd been sitting, he was pointing downward into the dark forest below. It took me a few seconds to see it. A light moving through the trees below us. Faint but clear. It was weaving a path through the forest at what looked like a slow walking pace. My first thought was exactly what you'd expect. Someone had heard the clang from the tower and was headed toward us. We were about to get caught. But Charlie looked at me and said, "You think that's a person?" I asked him what else it could be. He said the light was moving too evenly. No swinging, no bounce, no variation in the way a handheld flashlight or lantern would move. It was almost perfectly smooth, like it was floating. We watched it in silence for several minutes. It was getting closer. That became obvious fairly quickly. The light was definitely tracking toward the tower. And the more I watched it, the more I understood what Charlie meant. It moved with this unnatural steadiness that I couldn't explain. Then once briefly, one moment it was here. The next, it was a few feet further along, without any movement in between. After about 10 minutes, the light reached the base of the tower and stopped. Directly below us, not moving. We waited for someone to announce themselves. A ranger, a hiker, anyone. Nothing. Charlie, being Charlie, leaned over the railing and yelled down, "Hey, you doing all right down there?" No response. The light didn't even flicker. He tried again a minute later. Still nothing. We were 60 feet up, in an abandoned structure with no other exit. And someone or something was sitting at the bottom. After about 30 minutes of watching the light hold its position without any change, I grabbed my flashlight and shone it straight down at the base of the tower. Even with the beam, I couldn't make out a source for the other light. I couldn't see a person, a lantern. Just that glow sitting there. Eventually, while Charlie and I were debating what to do, I looked down and realized the light was gone. The base of the tower was dark again. Charlie thought whoever it was had simply left. The idea that something had been sitting at our only exit point and had now vanished without us seeing or hearing it move was more frightening to me than when it was visible. We went inside the cab to wait out the night. We weren't going to sleep. That was clear to both of us without saying it out loud. Less than 20 minutes later, the sound started. Not footsteps. That's important. I was specifically listening for footsteps on the stairs, and these weren't that. These were metallic sounds, heavy clangs, resonating up through the steel frame of the tower, like something striking a support beam with a tool. Then a grinding sound, sustained like metal being twisted against metal. The sounds came irregularly, from what seemed like different positions, which meant whatever was making them was moving around at the base of the structure. Charlie and I sat across from each other in the dark cab, keeping watch through the windows on opposite sides. We couldn't agree on anything. The sounds continued on and on. Then I saw the shape. I was watching the windows on the far wall. A dark outline moved across one of the glass panes. My brain scrambled to process it. And then it moved across the next pane over, and that confirmed it. Something had just passed in front of the cab windows. 60 feet off the ground, on the outside of the structure, I yelled. Charlie scrambled back from his side of the room. We both moved to the door and pressed ourselves against it, bracing it shut from inside. We stayed like that until sunrise. When there was finally enough light to see, I threw the door open. Nothing on the walkway. We ran around the perimeter of the cab to confirm clear. I looked down to the base. Nothing there either. We grabbed our gear and started descending as fast as we safely could. We were about 3/4 of the way down the staircase when Charlie stopped in front of me. An entire section of the staircase was gone, not a few loose steps. A complete section of metal stairs had been removed. The gap was wide enough that there was no way around it. We were staring at raw air. Where the staircase should have been, someone had disassembled a section of steel staircase. During the night, while we were sitting directly above it, We eventually jumped the gap. Charlie twisted his ankle on the landing. I made it fine. We descended the rest of the way and hit the ground. There was nothing waiting for us at the bottom. No person, no equipment. They were simply gone. I've never been able to explain any part of it. Not the floating light. Not the sounds. Not the shape I saw outside the cab windows. And definitely not how someone removed an entire section of a steel staircase in the middle of the night without the two of us hearing it happen. Charlie and I still talk about this every time we see each other. After all these years, neither of us has come up with a better answer. 2 stories in, and both of them involved something that seemed to be watching, waiting and planning. But those encounters lasted hours. Our final narrator spent multiple nights deep in the backcountry before he realized something had been with him the entire time. Something that tore trees out of the ground in the middle of the night and left his personal belongings as a message. That story is next, and it might be the one that stays with you the longest. I go camping alone a few times a year. Have been doing it since my 20s, and at this point, I've got close to 15 years of solo trips behind me. I know the risks. That's why I carry a rifle. This particular trip happened about 2 years ago in the Daniel Boone National Forest in eastern Kentucky. It's an enormous stretch of wilderness. Over 700,000 acres, and if you know where to go, you can spend days out there without seeing another human being. That's exactly what I needed at the time. Work had been grinding me down, and my head wasn't in a good place. I just needed to disconnect. I drove out on a Thursday morning, parked at a trailhead off a Forest Service road, and started walking. The plan was simple: 3 nights in the backcountry. No agenda. I had my tent, 4 days of food and water, and my .308 bolt action. The first day was exactly what I'd been craving. I covered about 7 miles before finding a flat site beside a dry creek bed. Got a fire going before dark, cooked dinner, had a beer, and let the silence do what silence does. I was asleep by 10. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. No particular reason, just that thing that happens when you're sleeping somewhere unfamiliar and your brain switches on without warning. I lay there staring at the ceiling of my tent, waiting to figure out why I was awake. Then I noticed the glow. There was a faint orange light coming through the fabric of my tent walls. I unzipped the flap and looked out. About 200 yards away through the trees, there was a fire. Not a big one, campfire sized, but it was clearly burning. Flickering. The kind of warm, dancing light that's unmistakably a fire. And not anything else. I watched it for a while, listening for voices or movement. There was nothing, just the fire burning steadily in the dark. I figured it was another camper who'd gone to sleep and left their fire running. Irresponsible, but not uncommon. After a few minutes, I zipped the tent back up and went to sleep. The next morning, I went to find the site. It took me about 10 minutes to reach the area where the fire had been. There was a clearing there that lined exactly with the angle I'd been looking from. But when I got there, I stopped. There was no fire pit. No ring of stones. No ash, no scorched earth, no charred wood. The ground was completely undisturbed. It looked like no one had set foot there in months. I walked the entire clearing, checking for any trace of a camp. Nothing. I stood there for a while, genuinely confused. I had watched that fire for several minutes. It had been clearly burning, and yet the ground beneath it looked pristine. I moved on. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. I just wasn't seeing. I hiked for most of that second day. By mid-afternoon, I was in a denser, older section of the woods, where the canopy closed over and everything got quieter. I found a good campsite around 4 in the afternoon, got settled, put out my fire a little after 9, and turned in. I don't know what time it was when the first sound woke me. It was loud enough to pull me out of a deep sleep. This enormous, distant cracking that went on for several seconds. Then a crash of branches and a low, heavy thud that I could feel in the ground beneath me. A tree had come down somewhere in the woods. I lay there for a minute, heart rate elevated. A falling tree is one of those sounds that's both awe-inspiring and unsettling, but it wasn't storming. There was almost no wind. I couldn't think of any reason a tree would come down on a night like this, but there wasn't anything I could do about it. I tried to let my adrenaline settle and close my eyes. Maybe 10 minutes later, it happened again. Same sound, that prolonged crackling and grinding, the rush of falling branches. And then a concussive thud that was noticeably closer than the first one. Close enough that the impact registered in my body, and it came from a completely different direction. I sat up 2 trees down on the same night, in different parts of the forest, with no storm, no wind. That was not something I could explain. The most logical thought I had was that the first fall had triggered some kind of chain reaction, but that didn't hold up. The 2 trees had fallen in completely separate areas of the forest. They had nothing to do with each other. I was still trying to make sense of it when I heard the third thing, a sound I had never heard before. Low continuous, something between a groan and a growl. The way you might describe a person clearing their throat very slowly, except it didn't stop, it just kept going. This deep resonant rumble that seemed to have no source I could pin down. I've spent a lot of time outdoors. I've heard bears. I've heard elk. I've heard bobcats doing things that would unsettle a lot of people. This wasn't any of those. It didn't sound like something reacting or communicating. It sounded intentional. Sustained. I grabbed my rifle, chambered around as quietly as I could, and aimed it at the tent flap. I stayed in that position for the better part of 20 minutes. The sound eventually faded. Not abruptly, but gradually, like whatever was making it had moved further away. And then the forest was quiet. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. At first light, I came out of the tent, packed up as quickly as I could manage. The closer one, I needed to confirm that I hadn't imagined it. I found it after about 10 minutes. It was massive. A full-grown hardwood lying across the slope branches, scattered in every direction. The impact zone was obvious. It was real. I walked over to the stump. The break was about 3 feet off the ground, and the wood was pale and fresh. But what stopped me was the texture of the break point. It wasn't the kind of fracture you get from wind or root failure, that jagged, splintered split you'd expect. This wood had been torn. There were long, irregular grooves running through the stump at different angles, some of them close to 1 inch deep. The surface looked chewed and gouged rather than snapped. Some of the bark around the base had been peeled away in long strips, and the exposed wood underneath had the same pattern. I've seen beaver damage. I've seen woodpecker damage. This was neither. This was aggressive and covering too much surface area for any animal I could name. Something had worked on that trunk until it came down. I started backing away from the stump, and that's when I saw the items on the ground near the fallen branches. A small cluster of things that looked man-made. I almost didn't check, but something about the placement stopped me. It was a blue bandana and a carabiner. Both of them mine. I dug through my pack and confirmed it. Both items were missing. They had been taken from my pack at some point during the night while I was asleep in my tent. I grabbed them and ran. I ran until my legs gave out under the weight of my gear. Then I walked as fast as I could for the rest of the day with my rifle in my hand, feeling watched every single moment. I made it back to my car around 3 in the afternoon and drove out of there without stopping. I called the police from the road. They listened politely. I don't think they took it seriously. 4 days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about what the full picture meant. The fire with no source. 2 trees brought down in the same night with no weather to explain it. That sound, and those items placed deliberately beside the tree, like a message. Something had been in my camp while I was asleep. Something had been with me from the beginning, possibly tracking me from the moment I stepped off the trail. I've never found an explanation that fully accounts for all of it. I don't think it was human. As for what animal it could have been, I genuinely don't know. I still go camping. I know that probably sounds strange after everything I just told you, but it's in my blood at this point. I don't think I could stop even if I wanted to. I just don't always feel alone out there anymore. 3 stories, 3 people who walked into the wilderness and came back fundamentally changed. But here's what I keep coming back to. In every single one of these accounts, whatever was out there didn't just stumble across these people. It found them, it watched them. And in at least one case, it had been watching long before they ever knew something was there. In part 4, we're going back into those woods one more time, because there's a detail from tonight's final story that I don't think we've fully reckoned with yet. Something I think deserves its own conversation. Don't go anywhere that I want to go back to something. In the last account, the man camping alone in eastern Kentucky, he mentions a fire burning in the woods about 200 yards from his tent. He watches it for several minutes. It's clearly there, clearly burning, and then in the morning, when he goes to find the site, the ground is completely undisturbed. No ash, no scorched earth, no evidence that anything had burned there at all. I keep coming back to that detail because I think it's the one element of his story that doesn't fit any framework I can apply to it. Unexplained, but at least physical. The items taken from his pack. Terrifying. But at least something with hands could have done it. But a fire that burns for 5 or more minutes and leaves no trace on the ground beneath it. I've heard accounts like this before. A disproportionate number of them come from people spending time alone in old-growth forest, the kind of wilderness that hasn't been significantly altered in centuries. And across those accounts, lights that don't behave like handheld lights. Sounds with no identifiable source. The specific visceral sensation of being observed. And occasionally physical evidence of something large, something strong that doesn't match any known animal profile. Now, I'm not going to stand here. I don't know what it means, but I do think about the 3 people whose stories we heard tonight. One of them was set up in a trap that had almost certainly claimed other victims before him. One spent a night 60 feet in the air, while something dismantled the staircase below him. And one had a creature or something leave his own belongings at the base of a destroyed tree, like a calling card. None of them were reckless people. None of them went looking for trouble. They were just in the wrong place. Or maybe they were in exactly the right place to encounter something that most of us never do, because most of us never go that deep. The woods have always had an interior that doesn't belong to us. We push into it. We set up our camps. And we tell ourselves that we know what's out there. We've cataloged it, classified it. We have field guides and wildlife databases and trail maps, but the people in tonight's stories walk past the edge of all that. And something on the other side noticed. I'll leave you with one final thought. The man from the Daniel Boone National Forest, after everything, the trees, the sound, the missing items, the sleepless night, with his rifle aimed at the tent door, he still goes camping. Still goes back into those same kinds of forests. He said, I just don't always feel alone out there anymore. I think about that a lot, about whether that's the most unsettling ending to a story, or the most honest one. Because maybe that feeling isn't new. Maybe we were never alone out there. Maybe we just weren't paying attention before. Sleep well. Series finale. If these stories got under your skin, tonight we have more accounts from people who came back from the deep wilderness, changed by what they encountered. Real stories. Unexplained encounters. Next time, we're going further in and the accounts get darker. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And if you have your own story, something that happened to you out there that you've never been able to explain, you know where to find us.